Hey guys, welcome to the Massive Iron Channel. I'm Steve Shaw. In this video, we're going to discuss how much muscle mass you can expect to gain in the coming year. Before we get into this topic, if you have any questions or comments, drop them down below. The best topic ideas turn into videos just like this. If you need coaching, I would love to help. Check out the link down below. All right, so we're going to dive into muscle mass expectations. I'm going to get into the nuts and bolts of basically what you can expect to gain year in and year out based on your current level. And this might help you judge a little bit, how serious you're doing, maybe get you to think about some of the things you can improve and maybe help you overall to expedite and get in a better groove when it comes to muscle building. Now, before I get into this topic, I want to lead by saying that this can be a controversial topic. I've spent my adult life studying natural muscle building potential. I'm not trying to limit anybody, but by putting out a video like this, I'm trying to give you guys a tool, some reasonable goals based on personal experience and the information I have found while studying natural muscle building. Understand that if you look at these numbers and you think you're capable of 5 to 10 more pounds of mass, the rules are still going to apply. You just have to basically take the percentages given in this video and slice them in the same way. All right, so let's start off by discussing natural muscle building expectations. If you're starting at a normalized weight and you're not starting underweight, you're not like an 18-year-old that's 132 pounds and a little bit underweight. You're starting more of a normalized adult weight. And we're going to get into female expectations as well. But if you're starting at a normalized weight, you can expect to gain about 30 to 32 pounds of muscle mass over the course of your life. Maybe as high as 35 pounds of muscle mass if genetically you're just built with bigger bones and maybe you're a little bit taller, etc. Again, this is starting from a normalized body weight and not an underweight condition. 30 to 32 pounds of mass is substantial. To frame that, I've gained about, 30 to 31 pounds of mass over the course of my 30 plus years of training. When you look at guys like Alpha Destiny or Jeffrey Verity Schofield, they're probably getting pretty close to that range, right around 25, 27, 30, maybe even as high as 32. I believe even recently Jeff Nippard came out and made a video where he commented that he gained about 27 pounds of mass over the course of his life. So 30 to 32 is pretty reasonable. If you're going to gain this kind of mass, you're going to be at the level of Jeffrey Verity Schofield, Alex from Alpha Destiny, Jeff Nippard, those types of guys. Just guys, when you look at them, you think natural potential, right? So for the sake of round numbers, I like to use 32, and I'll explain a little bit why in a second. Basically, when you look at muscle building, it isn't a straight line. Whatever you have the ability to build over the course of your life, say it's 32 pounds of mass, you can expect to gain in an optimal state about half of that during the coming year. Now, optimal is kind of a cringe word, and I hate to toss out optimal, but we're going to use optimal in a general sense. If everything was absolutely perfect, if you were nailing your sleep every day and nailing your nutrition every day and nailing your training every day, and you didn't have any injuries and everything was just absolutely perfect, we'll consider that optimal. So in an optimal sense, if you have 32 pounds of mass to gain over the course of your life, you have the potential to gain about half of that during the coming year. If you've gained about 16 pounds of mass and you have the potential or about 16 pounds of mass to gain the rest of your life, you can expect to gain about half of that or 8 pounds in an optimal state during the coming year. So this rule of halfsies basically says the amount of mass you have left to gain, you could expect to gain about halfsies or about half of that during the coming year if everything was absolutely perfect and optimal. All right, so let's look at the levels of gains, and I'm going to get into gains for beginners, novices, beginners, intermediates, etc. here in just a second. But let's define a few things before we dive in. Optimal would be 100% of your half Cs, whatever you can expect to gain during the coming year. Optimal would be just about 100%. Everything is perfect, sleep and training, and you're not getting injured, and you're nailing your bulks, etc. You're just crushing the coming year in every possible way. Amazing, or 80%, that would be a more realistic number for people that are crushing things. You're probably not going to bulk the entire year. Something's probably going to come up, a few minor aches and pains and injuries over the course of a year. So in the context of analyzing half Cs, or what you can expect during the coming year, 80% is about as good as anyone could expect. It's super consistent, but how many people can be absolutely perfect, or using the cringe word optimal? Now, likely is a much better scenario. If you really got your head on straight and you're really training hard and nailing nutrition, likely is probably the most common. It's what you would be best expecting during the coming year. And if you exceed that by a little bit, great. Now, I'm not trying to limit anybody or lower expectations, but from what I've seen, if a beginner has an optimal ability to gain about 16 pounds of mass during the coming year, most beginners that are crushing it are going to be at about 60% of that, or somewhere around 10 pounds of mass. If you look at like what Jeffrey Verity Schofield did during the past year, he was more around the amazing. He had a really good year, just an amazing year. If you think of it in terms of a sport or a sports performance, an amazing year is just like a breakout year for someone. They just have a super quality year, and likely would just be what I would consider all-star status. You're doing great, you're on the right track, and this is a very sustainable rate. Now, grinding is what I would call most guys that are relatively serious, but they're going to have periods where they stray, mess around, change programs, take a month off, get an injury from squats, a lower back injury. They're fighting something. They're making gains, but they're really kind of in a deficit. They're not running anywhere near where they would want to run. And unfocused is basically, what we would call fuck arounditis. You gain a little bit, but that's just by default, because occasionally you're training hard enough when you're not screwing around and changing programs. Occasionally you'll gain a little bit when your nutrition is on point. You're actually in a surplus or a state you can gain. So these are the levels we're going to use, and let's dive into things. How are you doing as a noob? This is someone pretty fresh in muscle building, or someone that really hasn't built any muscle at all. Given the goal or the ideal of gaining about 30 to 32 pounds of mass over the course of your life, and using the rule of half Cs, a noob could expect, if they were optimal, to gain about 16 pounds of mass during the coming year, or their first year of training. Now, of course, this is virtually impossible, because who comes to training with everything absolutely optimized? You would have to be pretty darn lucky to stumble on just absolutely perfect sleep, and nailing your nutrition right out of the gate, and nailing hard training right out of the gate. Most of us need time to figure these things out. So as a noob, it's very unlikely for anyone to be running at a near optimal state. For a noob, if you hit amazing, you are definitely doing a great job. This would be about 12.8 pounds and would be extremely rare. It's more likely as a noob, if you crush everything and you're doing really good, that you're going to see around 9.6 to 10 pounds of muscle mass in your first year. Grinding is more likely. Those are the guys that hop on the internet, they get super fired up, they have a decent program, but there's still a lot of variables that they have to pick through and figure out. So it is probably more common to see a noob in the grinding range of about 6.4 pounds of muscle mass during their first year, or even more unfocused, around 3.2. There are simply a lot of variables and a lot of things that can confuse trainees out there. So if there's nothing wrong with being in this level during your first year, it's probably very common, more common than you would think. All right, so let's move on to late beginner. And these are just basically rough estimates, but a late beginner has about 24 pounds of mass left to go. They built about 8, and we're using these numbers, we're using these round numbers just as reference points. So a beginner has trained maybe 6, 8, 12 months, whatever the case may be. They have about 24 pounds of muscle left to gain. And if they're running optimal, they're going to gain about 12, amazing 9.6, more likely about 7.2. And it's likely during their second and maybe third year, they're going to gain somewhere around this level. And then grinding 4.8 and unfocused 2.4. Now, moving on to an intermediate, someone that has gained about half of their muscle mass. They look pretty good. Maybe they have 15 and a half inch arms. Their numbers on the big lifts are fairly respectable, but they still have a long way to go from that intermediate stage to looking like an Alpha Destiny or looking like a Jeffrey Verity Schofield or looking like a Reg Park or Steve Reeves. So optimal would be about 8 pounds, amazing 6.4, likely 4.8, grinding 3.2, and unfocused 1.6. So an intermediate's probably going to gain about 4.8 or somewhere in that level if they are training really hard. If they kind of lose focus a little bit or life comes up, they can't train as hard as they want to. Maybe they're transitioning in college. Maybe they got married. Maybe they had a kid. A lot of things can happen in life, but it's not uncommon for an intermediate to drop down into 1, 2, or 3 pounds per year. And finally, we have the later intermediate or someone that is really getting close to just crushing their natural gains or getting close to their natural potential. And again, I don't use natural potential as a limiter. A late intermediate or later intermediate has about 10 pounds left. They're looking really good, but they know there's a next level that they want to achieve. Optimal would be about 5 pounds, amazing about 4 pounds, likely 3, grinding 2, and unfocused 1. So you can see as a beginner, using the rule of half C's, you have the potential in an optimal world to gain about 16 pounds of mass. And when you're a later intermediate and you have about 10 pounds left, using the rule of half C's, you have about 5. At this stage, crushing 5 pounds of mass would be an amazing accomplishment. It's more likely you're going to grind it out at 2 or 3 for a number of years. Now, the question is, what about women? Well, the honest answer is there's not a lot of research on females. There's simply not a lot of females out there that are trying to achieve maximum natural muscle mass. So based on what I have seen, it's safe to use a modifier of about 4.4 or 40%. So if men can gain about, 30 pounds of mass over the course of their life, it's more reasonable for a woman to think around 8 to 12 pounds of mass. So you could basically use a 0.3 or 0.4 modifier for any of these numbers, or 30 to 40%. But again, this is simply speculation. Now, I'm going to end with my journey. I began training in 1986, had no idea about any of this stuff. I don't know. I think I was like 163, 162, 164 pounds and skinny fat. And after like my first year and a half or 2 years of lifting, I ended up at about 184. I didn't bulk on purpose. I just was at college and had access to a cafeteria where I could eat as much food as I wanted to. So my first couple of years of training, I gained about 20 pounds on the scale. I would say from the way I looked, I gained about maybe 14 to 15 pounds of mass. And then the next year, year and a half, I gained about another 5 to 7. So I entered what you would call maybe the later intermediate stage in this video. I was probably about 10 pounds away from where I am now. Looking back, I thought I was pretty darn optimal. I thought I had everything nailed down, and I was close at just crushing my entire first year. I really had a good first year. I crushed my sleep. I never missed workouts. I was super consistent, and I ate in a surplus nearly every single day. So in a sense, I had about as perfect of a first year or perfect of a first 3 or 4 years as you can get. Even so, I wasn't quite at the amazing stage. I was probably more around 70 to 75%, maybe 65 to 75% of optimal. This just goes to show when you think you're just absolutely crushing it, and I think I was pretty much crushing everything as good as I could. It's still very, very hard to get above 70 to 75% of your halfsies. So, guys, hope this video has been of some help. If you have any questions or comments, drop them down below. If you made it this far in this video and have yet to subscribe to my channel, please do. I'd appreciate the support. So, guys, as always, thanks for watching. Have a great day.